Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. It's great to have you joining us here on the show today. Before we get to our conversation with Joel Dreessen, the former NFL tight end, I want to tell you about our brand new podcast that released December 16th, and it's called Football Sunday. This is a podcast from the creators of Sports Spectrum. It's our second venture into the podcast world, and it's really a unique way to tell first-person stories from NFL players, current and former players, on how God has worked profoundly in their lives. Short podcasts here. It's 5 to 10 minutes long, and it's, again, first-person stories. The athletes themselves, people like Drew Brees and Kirk Cousins and Thomas Davis, players in the NFL currently and some former players, guys like Matt Hasselbeck, Brandon Marshall, all telling their stories of how God has worked and moved profoundly in their lives. We're so excited about this podcast. We really love for you to subscribe to it right now so that you never miss an episode. New episodes will be dropped every Monday all the way up to the Super Bowl, the Monday after the Super Bowl. There'll be 12 episodes total, and you can go and listen right now to the first 3 that were released, and I'm telling you, you're going to love it. Football Sunday, Football Sunday's podcast. Subscribe today. Joel Dreessen is our guest today on Sports Spectrum, former NFL tight end selected in the 6th round of the 2005 NFL Draft by the New York Jets, played his college football at Colorado State, and in 2005 he was a rookie with the Jets, and then in 2006 was out of the league, out of the NFL, thought his career might be over, and then got picked up by the Texans, made the squad, and spent 5 years there from 2007 to 2011. And then Joel got a call from one Peyton Manning, and suddenly he was a Denver Bronco and played his final 2 years in the NFL in 2012 and 2013 with the Denver Broncos. He was a member of that AFC Championship team in Denver in 2013 that went all the way to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, it didn't end well when they lost to Seattle in a blowout in that game played in New Jersey outdoors. But Joel got to play in a Super Bowl, and we asked him the question, would you rather have not played in the Super Bowl or played and lost badly? And that's what ended up happening, and Joel's answer was a pretty good one. But Joel's faith, this is one where he's gone through a lot in his journey, and he shares it. He's as transparent as they come, both during his career, the ups and downs, and then post-career, acclimating to life after the NFL. And it was not an easy road for Joel. He talks about how he went into a depression and really wasn't quite sure if he'd find his way out of it. And thankfully he did. And we got to sit down in person, which is always my favorite type of podcast, here in Denver, Colorado, where I'm taping this intro for you right now, and really had a great discussion. Joel Dreessen is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. Take a listen to our conversation with Joel. Joel, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Hey, thanks for including me. Really appreciate it.
I'm excited to talk to you, man. Well, you and I met, you said 2012. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was right after I signed with Denver. I attended the NFL broadcast boot camp that summer of 2012. So met you there. I think you were one of the mentors working with the guys when you were still employed with ESPN. So I remember you from that. So
you're not broadcasting, though. So what happened there? You didn't want to go into broadcasting after you played?
No, I did. I got retired. A lot of guys, they retire from the NFL, but for the majority of us, I got retired. Injury decides for the majority of us, and that was my case. And I loved football. And for the longest time, I thought, oh, that'll be easy, just to go right into talking about football after I'm done playing. And I did that for a long time. I was a co-host of a morning radio show here in Denver for the entire 2015 season. And I called some high school games, did some color analysis work for some college games also. But it just wasn't a good fit. It took me to a place mentally where I didn't want to go. And I finally, I'm so glad we're doing this because I read The Purpose-Driven Life. And I felt like God was talking so clear to me that he said, Joel, just turn the page, just on broadcasting. And it was so clear to me that I was like, look, I'm never going to broadcast again. I don't want to do it. And I realized I hated it. I didn't want to keep talking about someone I used to be. I had to turn the page and look forward, and I don't regret it at all.
No, that's good. And I think, and first of all, that book is amazing, The Purpose-Driven Life. I mean, if anybody listening who hasn't read it, from Rick Warren, first of all, it's one of the most read books, I think, on any level in history. It's like the top 3 or 4 books ever read. It's really crazy when you got the Bible and then a bunch of other really well-known books, but then somewhere in there pops up The Purpose-Driven Life, and it's impacted a lot of people. Let me stay with that for a second. Why was that book so impactful for you? I know it's been a few years probably since you read it, but it's a powerful book for a lot of people when they read it. Why did that hit you the way it hit you?
Yeah. Well, I had started it my senior year in college, and I got to day 32 or 33, and for whatever reason, I just didn't finish it. And for those that don't know, it's broken up into 40 days. And I was determined to finish it, and I had just had this septum surgery, okay? And I couldn't breathe out of my nose. I had these plugs, these stents in my nose, and I was really, really miserable. And I was kind of at a point in my life where man, do I keep pursuing this broadcasting even though I don't like it? I don't have to work. I was dealing with just a lot of health issues from football, and I've picked up that book. I was like, if there's ever a time I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read it just like it says to. I'm going to read 1 chapter a day for the next 40 days. I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to listen to what God has to say. And I was just at a crossroads in my life, at a really broken time. And it just really hit home to me with what I shouldn't be doing. And it just felt nice and very liberating to move on from football at that time.
So I look on your Twitter page now, and obviously we've known each other a while, but it says you're just a man trying to matter and do it God's way. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean exactly when you write something like that? What you mean by that?
Well, I started a Twitter account back when I signed with the Broncos in 2012, and the funny story is I heard Reese Witherspoon when she played June Cash in that movie Walk the Line, and she did a phenomenal job. And I heard her give an interview once that June Carter Cash said that, hey, I'm just trying to matter. I was like, man, that's kind of how I feel about myself, is I'm really just trying to matter, but I'm also trying to do it God's way. I'm far from perfect. I definitely still have my struggles and my issues, but if I can just strive each day to be a little bit more like Jesus, then I think then I am trying to matter. And to me, that's the most important effort you can put forth.
Joel Dreessen is our guest here on Sports Spectrum, the former NFL tight end. So let's kind of go through your journey a little bit. We're taping this in Colorado, in Highlands Ranch, right where Sports Spectrum is located. High school grad and state champ at Fort Morgan High School in Colorado. Went to Colorado State, signed eventually with the Broncos. So Colorado's been pretty good to Joel Dreessen, huh?
Yeah, no doubt. Moved here when I was 3, and I grew up in a small town out east called Fort Morgan. And my dad worked for the city, and he worked in construction. My mom was a nurse, and we had a small acreage outside of town. And it was really literally out of a country song, how my youth was, my childhood was. The town would close down on Friday nights for football games, and you'd probably end up somewhere around a bonfire that night with young kids causing chaos, causing trouble. But I loved my time in Fort Morgan and was fortunate enough to have some very, very good influences in my life, one being my brother. And he kind of paved the way for me. He showed me what it took to be a good athlete, a good student, as well as my older sister, and was able to earn a college scholarship to play tight end at Colorado State. And I guess to summarize it very quickly, had a decent career there and was able to get drafted by the Jets in the 6th round. And I played a year there, and then was cut by Eric Mangini after my second training camp, and spent the whole year out of football. I spent all of 2006 out of football, and finally got an opportunity again with the Houston Texans, and really rededicated my life or made some changes. And, I played in every single game for the next 5 years, and then was able to, finish my career here in Denver.
So there's a lot there, obviously. That's the short version. But let's unpack a little bit of that. I think from a faith perspective, let's start there and kind of where that journey began. You've talked a few times about rededicating, about coming back, maybe even reading The Purpose-Driven Life, and kind of the ebbs and flows that honestly happen to all of us on our faith journey. So where does it start with you? How does that walk with the Lord begin? And then we'll get into maybe some of the ways that kind of you fell away or just kind of became, kind of stale with it or whatever it is. But where does it start? Let's start there.
Yeah, great question. And I vividly remember a Sunday in the fall when I was in 6th grade. Okay, I grew up in a household where my father was not the spiritual leader of our household. The only time he ever stepped foot into a church was for a funeral or a wedding. Sundays he just worked. He just kept right along working. I remember asking him if he believed in God once when I was a kid, and he said he didn't know. And so I didn't come from this background where God and Jesus and faith was pushed upon me. It just wasn't something that was, I don't want to say valued, but it just wasn't super strong in our household growing up. But my mother, it was always very important to her. It was important to her to go to church, and she would go to Bible studies and devotionals and that sort of thing. And so one day in 6th grade, I had been going to church with her, but I went to church with her, and I was actually going to Sunday school, and she was going to her Bible study. And I was the only kid in the 6th grade class that showed up that day. And so here I am with a couple of elders of the church, and they basically said, "What questions can we answer for you?" And I'm like, all the cliche questions that a kid has about God. I was like, how do you get into heaven? What happens if you are still a sinner when you died? Is hell real? All those sort of things. And they were very patient with me and very kind. And I remember having all of my questions kind of answered and addressed, and it was a really cool one-on-one situation to be in. And I remember walking out to my mom's minivan. I got out earlier than she did. And I prayed. I was like, God, just what is this all about? I don't know what it's all about, but I want it to be for me. And I just very vividly remember, people can pinpoint this moment when they're saved. And maybe that was it for me. I'm not sure, but I just know that life was never the same for me after that moving forward. And, right around that same age, that same time, I remember telling all my friends, I'm like, hey, I'm going to play in the NFL. I promise you I'm going to play in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at what it takes to play in the NFL. And it's this huge mountain. Obviously, you have to be a good high school athlete. You have to be a good college athlete. You have to be good enough to make it to the NFL and be good enough to make a roster and stay on the roster. And I'm like, wow, but I want that. And I think of that and that mountain that you have to climb to get there. And God started putting all these pieces in place for me at a young age. And he really blessed me with some traits as far as toughness and work ethic and a desire to improve myself and get better. And I remember hanging my hat on a verse at a very young age, delight thyself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. All I ever loved was football. And he helped me. He helped me do that. And, but it's not like you just wake up one day and God makes you an NFL player. He's more concerned with your character than your comfort or giving you, just handing you gifts. He developed my character so that I could do that. And to me, to this day, it's not coincidence. It was by design. And that's my testimony forever.
No, I love it. And I love that it still hits you. I can just tell in the way that you're telling it because it's an important part of your journey. But as I talk to a lot of athletes, current and former players, you hear how that football sometimes can get in the way of our relationship with God or in many ways become God to us. Sure. Not to us, not to me, I never played, but to the players, because they get so consumed with their identity being caught up as a football player. Even as I introduce you, I say Joel Dreessen, the former NFL player, sure, not Joel Dreessen, the believer in Jesus, which is really where your identity and our identity is found. So for you, as you begin this journey into the NFL and you're selected, like you said, 6th round, 2005 NFL draft by the New York Jets, how was that coming into the NFL as a believer? Was it hard to really bring your faith into the NFL? Was your desire still at that point as a young age, 22, 23 years old, to truly serve God? Because that can be hard for a lot of guys when they come into the NFL who may lose focus because they just are trying to achieve and trying to, get the approval of your team to make the roster.
Yeah, and you're right. It's very tricky, and all of a sudden, and I think that's at times where I began to fall away from God, is where I started to think, pat myself on the back. I did this on my own, and start to believe what the world tells you is that your value is how much money you make, or how athletic you are, or how many women you sleep with. And it's just, it was a battle. Don't get me wrong. None of any of that was easy, but there's another verse that I always hung my hat on is seek first the Lord, and all these things will be given to you. Yeah. I always thought that if I could aim to please God first, then all those things will follow suit. But it was tricky because it's very demanding as a rookie. How do you allocate your time? How do you find a way to have a social life, be good at football, be there for your family, and also be someone who pursues Jesus and shares the gospel? So I don't know how I did it, really. I look back sometimes and I'm like, man, I must have been tougher back then, but it worked out.
Were there Bible studies and things that you were a part of during the time, especially during the season, where those were non-negotiables? You were attending them, or was that something that even for you was difficult?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. Kevin Mawai was actually a great influence on me as a rookie, and I would hear him pray, and I would hear him lead our Bible studies. And every team that I was ever on, I connected with the team chaplain, and if they had something going on where they were trying to organize a Bible study, I would be one of only 4 or 5 guys in the room at times. I never missed a team chapel, whether it was on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning. That was just, to me, that was always just part of it. Part of being a good athlete. That I've read that there's four concepts to it, really. Obviously, physical, emotional, and intellectual. Okay, and then spiritual. Yeah. So I was not about to ignore one of those concepts. I wanted to be as good as I could and really include all of those.
Joel Dreessen is joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Let's talk a little on the field for a minute. It's interesting because you said something that almost made me think maybe I shouldn't ask him about on the field, because you said you stopped broadcasting because you didn't want to talk about football or always be reminded of what you had done in the past. But if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of dive into your on the field career a little bit, because you had a unique career, and I think 2006 might be a good place to start first, because you said you were out of football and you're 24 at that point. How hard was that to be in a year are you doubting yourself at that point, thinking, man, maybe my career is over before it even started?
Right. So I was obviously drafted by the Jets in 2005, and I played in 14 games as a rookie. Okay. And back then they had a rule where if you played in so many games, you could never be on a practice squad again. So Herm Edwards moves on to Kansas City, and Eric Mangini comes in. I've prayed for that man a lot, but I feel like he's an enemy of mine. I can tell you that much. And so I get cut at the end of training camp, and I was like, I'll get opportunity elsewhere. Even Mike Tannenbaum, Eric Mangini, because I'm sitting in the office getting cut, and I'm like, what? Why? Help me understand why. And they reassured me up and down, Joel, you're going to have opportunity elsewhere. Okay. I never did. Not that whole season. I couldn't be on a practice squad. A team was going to have to put me on the roster for me to be on the team, really. And I just wasn't good enough as a rookie. I think I had 5 catches that season. I played special teams. I did some good things, but I was still really raw as an NFL football player. So I went to workouts every single Tuesday for a number of teams, 8 or 9 teams, and I got told the same story, really, that, oh, you're number 1 or 2 on our list. If we have an injury, we'll holler at you. And it just never happened. And it was an incredible time of self-doubt. I really thought, like, man, is this really it for me? I'm going to get 14 games in this deal. I'm supposed to play a long time. I'm banking on this. I don't know anything else. There is no plan B. This is plan A. And it was a really humbling time. Very difficult. Really a time where I questioned my faith too. I'm like, man, God's not looking out for me. He brought me this far just to give up on me. Yeah. But he starts a good work in you, and he's going to see it finished. And I signed a future contract January 2nd, 2007 with the Houston Texans, and it worked out.
Yeah, he played 5 seasons there and had a good career that culminated in turning it into a contract with the Broncos. So your time in Houston, on the field, what's that like, being a part of the Houston Texans, but actually establishing yourself as a guy who is still on the team? And listen, the NFL is not for long. There's never a guarantee. It's year to year. In many ways, it's week to week. But you get to the Texans and you play 5 seasons. So that self-doubt that you had, that moment that's going through on your journey to the point where you're thinking, maybe I'm not going to be playing here anymore. Now you're suddenly established and things start to settle in. So give me the good side of that, and give me maybe the bad side of that, because I think there's some negatives to that too, especially what we talked about with regards to faith. Yeah.
I remember 2007, no lie. I prayed so much. I think my prayer life was as good as it's ever been. I would literally light up that hotel room throughout training camp. Lord, just please help me have a good practice, keep me healthy, help me find a way with my 4 reps I get per practice. I was buried on the depth chart, no lie. I was 5th tight end on the depth chart, and I would get a handful of reps every practice, and I had to make them count. And I did. I did enough throughout that training camp to make the 53. But once you make the 53, the work is not done. You have to have a uniform on game day to really have your position secured. And finally worked my way into that scenario. And 07, 08, I was making league minimum. I was that guy on the roster bubble throughout training camp. Like, am I going to make this team? You're always sweating that phone call on cut day. And it was just, I remember making that team in 07 and feeling so blessed, just so incredibly blessed. Like, my dream came back to me. I just felt rewarded for my hard work and my faith. And I when I say I loved football, I did. It just meant everything to me. And it was not, I didn't do it for the money. I didn't do it for the attention. That didn't mean anything to me. To me, it was a chance to see how much you could push yourself every week. How hard could you work to prepare for your opponent? How ready could you get yourself on game day, both mentally, physically, spiritually? It was just such an incredible challenge that I loved moving that bar every single week, and to be on a football team. And I just remember feeling incredibly blessed my whole time in Houston. And don't get me wrong, it was a lot of hard work. And there's times where like, maybe this will be my last year. This will be good. But you never really meant it. You always wanted one more year.
What's something that the typical NFL fan maybe doesn't understand about the tight end position and all that goes into that position?
To me, the tight end, we have to be the second smartest after the quarterback. No lie. We have to know every single run, every single route pattern, every single protection, and we have to play special teams. No lie. There was weeks where I would study and fall asleep with my playbook on my chest, week in, week out, fall asleep with an iPad on my chest, just trying to absorb all the information that's expected for you to go into game day with. And it's just a lot of stuff. And, you have to be able to block like a left tackle, okay? And you have to be able to run routes like a slot receiver. That is a really diverse skill set. So if there's one thing I'd have to say about tight ends is, like, we're pretty bad We have to be able to do a lot of stuff and know a lot of different things.
I feel like the tight end position too, you're also in a lot more pain the day after a game. Is that fairly accurate compared to like a wide receiver, because the fact that you have to block on every running play and even some pass plays?
No lie. And in order for me to make a roster and get my career back on track, I had to do all the dirty work. So they called me clear routes and cut blocks for the longest time, because if there was a clear out, I was going to be in the game, sprinting downfield, running for the love of the game to take the top off the defense so Andre Johnson and Kevin Walter and Owen Daniels and all those guys could get open. And if there was a special teams, dirty work on special teams, I had to go do it. Cut blocks to be made. I was in there doing it, throwing my head at Dwight Freeney's knees. So, yeah, there was days where the injuries mounted up for sure. I think I ended up with 9 surgeries, and that stuff doesn't go away. I tell my family, or I tell my friends all the time that like our bodies are like cars that you crash. They say if you crash a car, it's never the same again. And I say that's how I felt after every surgery. I was never the same again after every surgery. It's
been 6 years since you played. Your last year was 2013. So does it still hurt? Do you still have pain from playing? I wonder, because a lot of guys, I talked to Mike DeVito, I think, recently on the podcast. I think he might have played with you. I don't know if he got there before that, but it was with the Jets in 06, 07, I think. But Mike talked about how his right shoulder is like an 80-year-old grandfather, basically, an old 80-year-old man, because of the position he played, defensive tackle. So 6 years later, do you still feel the effects of having played, for so many years in the NFL?
Every day, literally every day. That's funny that he mentioned his right shoulder, because my right shoulder kills me also. I had a torn labrum and a torn rotator cuff. I tore that halfway through the 09 season. But Owen Daniels was out with an ACL tear. And I was like, man, I cannot miss an opportunity to start. I'll get this fixed after the season. So I played the whole season with a torn rotator cuff. Oh. And obviously it got fixed after the season, but it has not been the same. I never got my range of motion back. It kills me all the time. Had 4 surgeries on my left knee, one on my right, an ankle, a toe. My low back has degenerative joint disease. And I never thought that I was going to be one of those athletes with the head stuff, but I definitely feel that. I definitely went through and still go through terrible headaches, sensitivity to light and to noise. I have these days where I'm just in a funk. I'm super foggy, irritable, moody. My short-term memory sucks, and it's scary. It's scary. So the head stuff is real, but I do believe that if you're aware of it, you can be as proactive as you possibly can to have a good life. And don't let me, sing the song that I'm a victim. No. I loved football. Football has always given much more to me than it's taken away so far. But you play long enough, you're going to deal with pain for a lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, it's the part that I think the fans will never understand until much later. And they see, I see a guy that I rooted for in my 20s, from the early 90s, and you see him around now and he's in his like mid to late 50s and he's barely walking. And I remember I worked with Mike Ditka, who was 70, whatever he was, 71, 72, and walking around, and it was like he was 95 years old, the way he was walking. Not the way he was mentally, but just his body was done. And he played in, the 50s and 60s and 70s or whatever it was. So you just know that this is bigger than, you play because of the love of the game, but how does that, I guess I'm trying to get to is, your son's here and, I'm watching him. He has his card collection. He loves football, obviously, and sports, but how does that affect you as a dad to be able to say to him, yeah, go play football, especially what you've been through? And I'm not saying he does or doesn't. You might tell me he doesn't play football, but as a dad, does that change your perception now, knowing what you've went through?
It does at times, for sure. You just worry about their health and safety. And
does he play?
Yeah, he doesn't play tackle yet. Okay. He's in 4th grade and he played flag. And he'll probably play flag football again next year. So my first year of tackle was in 7th grade, and so I think that's probably an appropriate time to start tackle football. I worry about these kids running around with these big helmets on, and they look like bobblehead dolls, and their brains are still developing. And, there's always that one kid that's more mature than the others, and he's just rocking everybody. And those hits to the head, they take a cumulative toll. And I worry about that, at such a young age. But if he wants to play tackle football in middle school and high school, I'm all for it. Like I said, it taught me so many lessons and developed my character and my faith in so many ways that I don't know if I would have been able to do otherwise.
Well, he'll have a good teacher too. You can teach him the right way to play football and the right way to tackle and the routes and all these other things. So that's an advantage for him if he plays. We'd be remiss if we had a conversation with Joel Dreessen and didn't ask you about Peyton Manning, because you went to Denver and played 2 seasons there, and it happened to be, I think, from a statistical standpoint, the best 2 seasons. So clearly it was because of Joel Dreessen. The best 2 seasons that Peyton Manning ever had as a quarterback, I believe. The 2012 year, which was unfortunately, the miracle at Mile High and that loss to the Ravens. And then 2013 was the Super Bowl year. What was that like to play with somebody like him? Future Hall of Famer, a true legend, but catching passes from him too.
I signed, Peyton signed. The whole NFL free agency was on hiatus to see where Peyton was going to sign. And then, all the pieces started to fall into place after that. And I didn't want to leave Houston. I was there for 5 years. We had a great thing going. And believe it or not, the contract was going to be the same. And I was like, all right, I'm going back to Houston. And I'm driving back to the airport on my visit from Denver. Peyton hollers at me, hey, we need a player like you. We need a tight end like you.
So he calls you.
Yeah, he calls me on the phone, and that was a huge difference-making moment for sure. And I didn't realize how good he was at the time. That's how, in my own little bubble I was as an athlete. Obviously, he beat the brakes off us every time we played him with the Texans. But I didn't understand how much an elite quarterback made until I was actually with him. And how he was able to keep everything organized in his head and communicate it to us pass catchers and the offensive line, all while the play clock's ticking down. He's going through a dummy cadence. It was fascinating to me. It was non-human to me. And it was really a special time to see how it's like, this dude is truly a master at his craft. And beyond that, just to be around him as a person too. He really was the definition of humility. It inspired me in a lot of ways. I'm lucky to call him a friend at this point. I think we don't get together very often, but it was an awesome time. That's all I can really say is I learned a lot from him, and man, what a blessing it was to catch a few touchdowns from him.
Now, would you rather have never played in the Super Bowl or play in the Super Bowl that you played in? Because the one you played in was not a pretty one. It was the Seahawks win over Denver. It was in New York City at the Meadowlands or MetLife Stadium, and it wasn't the best Super Bowl. Certainly Denver fans don't want to remember that one. But would you rather have never played, or can you still find something positive out of playing in that Super Bowl?
That was a really tough season for me. I had a surgery in May. We're just starting OTAs and mini camps, and my knee kind of starts to disintegrate. I say my brake pads started wearing out. So I had a surgery in May. And then about halfway through training camp, I had another surgery because the cartilage on my femur underneath my kneecap just starts to flake away. So obviously Julius Thomas kind of emerged on the scene as an incredible pass catcher, and him and Peyton had some amazing chemistry, and they were able to do some really awesome things. So I think that was going to happen. But I went kind of limp throughout the season in a reserve role, playing mostly special teams, and really delegated to just scout team during the week. It was a humbling time. But we had the best offense in the history of the NFL. Peyton threw for 55 touchdowns. Statistically, we were the best offense ever. Yeah. And it was so much fun to witness and be a part of. And I mean, we had, Demarius Thomas and Wes Welker and Eric Decker, these guys catching passes left and right. It was so much fun because we beat every team we played by 30. And, we beat the Patriots to go to the Super Bowl. And unfortunately I was hurt, too hurt at that point. I was inactive for all of the playoff games, which was, I would literally drive into work sobbing because I was so devastated to be inactive. It hurt bad, but the entire Super Bowl experience was phenomenal. It was just great. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, that's all I ever wanted was to be a contributing member to a Super Bowl winning team, a world championship team, and everything was great except for the game. The game, and it just didn't work out. Seattle was the better squad. They were just so good, so physical on defense. That's all I can say about it. But to answer the question, I would definitely rather make the Super Bowl and lose the way we did than to have never made it at all.
Yeah, a lot of people say that, but I think it's still an important question because of the way that game had finished out. All right, let's wrap it up. A couple more questions here. You said the NFL retired you, and that happens to a lot of players. It's very rare that you can be Peyton Manning and win a Super Bowl and then say, okay, I'm done now. I'm retiring. I'm off. I'm riding off into the sunset. It's very rare that happens. It's most players are still trying to work out, hang on maybe for another season. You see it right now. A guy like Des Bryant comes to my mind who didn't play last year because of an injury, and he's trying this hard this year, and he's 31 and he's running routes, and yet he's still without a team. And here we are late in the NFL season trying to hang on. And I hope he can play some more. I really do. But that's hard. So what was that experience like for you when the NFL is in essence retiring you? It sounds like you still wanted to play, even though you knew that the brake pads were falling off, as you said, and acclimating yourself to post-NFL life, which is a hard adjustment for a lot of guys.
Yeah. To answer the first part of the question, it's horrifying. And luckily, I had a really good tight ends coach. His name was Clancy Barone here at Denver. And I kind of went up to his office, mid-season 2013. I'm like, what's the deal here? Like, I'm practicing. I feel like I should be playing more. Julius was dealing with some injuries here and there, and I just wasn't getting the offensive work that I thought I should be getting. And he looks at me in the eye and he says, you're going to be the last one to see it, but you're not the same. He's like, I'm going to put together a clip of plays for you from who you were last year and who you are this year. And so I come back to his office in a couple hours, and he shows me 15 plays from 2012. And I'm like, God bless, I look explosive, I look good, I look fast. And then he shows me the exact same plays. A couple of them are blocking plays, a couple of them are routes. And it's just different. It's just different. I'm just a step slower. I lack the lower body strength. And by then the surgeries had started to take a toll. Like you're not the same. You're not the same, but the athlete is the last one to see it. Everyone else sees it before he does. And I'm very thankful for that moment that he was able to give me a visual to understand it. Wildly humbling. But I still think, I never really thought that I could play anymore. I was like, man, because every single season it took everything I had. No lie. For me to stay healthy and be a good football player, it took absolutely all of my max effort, everything I had. And so when I started dealing with pain and I couldn't practice on Wednesdays because I was getting my knee drained and things like that, I just wasn't good anymore. And I hated the product I was putting on film. I couldn't stand to watch myself. It hurt. It hurt really bad.
Was it hard to adjust to that post-NFL life, though? Because a lot of guys, it's hard. There's some guys I've talked to who said, yeah, I had plans. I knew what I was going to do. I was ready to go. And there are others who were like, I just don't know what to do with myself anymore. What was that like for you?
I thought I had a plan. I thought, I'll do dabble in some broadcasting. I literally saved every penny I made from the NFL. I wasn't going to have to worry about, the financial aspect of it. So the first year out of football, it was like, wow, I have an August. I have a life. This feels great. I can go hunting with my dad. I can still be involved with the game. I can go talk football on radio shows and TV. It's all good. But that second year out, when your body starts to feel somewhat better, and I was here in Denver, and Gary Kubiak signs as the Broncos head coach, and they go on to win the Super Bowl right under my nose, okay? Yeah. And I was not a part of it. I was launched into a terrible depression. It's suicidal, honestly, no lie. It was bad. I just missed it so much. I thought my life was never going to be as fulfilling or as meaningful or as impactful if I couldn't play pro football. And I never thought I was going to be that way, but I was. And it was incredibly hard time for me and my wife and my family, really, just because I was in such a dark place.
So how do you get out of that? I mean, is it your faith? Is it the restoring and renewing? God talks about renewing us on a daily basis. So is that where it was? Talk us and walk us through. Because I think a lot of people listening not only are empathizing with you because of other people having gone through it, but there are people who go through this on a daily basis, a difficult struggle with purpose and finding like the will to live. I mean, I had a dad who wanted to end his own life because he just didn't want to live anymore and was clinically depressed and couldn't handle it. So I understand. So walk us through getting out of that and how God helped you begin a new journey.
Yeah, well, God always gave me this ability to be resourceful, and there's a lot of tools at your disposal as a former NFL player, and free counseling was one of them. And so, I mean, I was to this point where, like I previously mentioned, and I was like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to holler at him. I'm going to holler at him on this free counseling deal, and God led me to a lot of prayer too. God led me to this very amazing counselor. Her name's Joanne, and she works here in Castle Rock, and she gave me some of the cognitive abilities to work myself out of that depression without medication. It still rears its head from time to time, and I don't know if that's a function of the brain injury or if that's just kind of where I'm at, but I don't know if I ever really will get out of it. It's just kind of part of who I am right now. But as far as fighting the daily battle, that's how I start my day. Is I get in the hot tub and I pray, and I just want my body to feel good. Lord, give me a chance with my head today to be in a good mood, and it's a daily battle. But as long as we just take it what it is, one day at a time. Take your first step of faith, and He's going to provide the rest.
So here we are now. It's 2019. You just turned 37 in the summertime, and you've been out of the game a while now. So I do see you on Twitter quite a bit, commenting on different plays. I even saw you mentioning you were watching the Ravens play, and you were like, man, golly, if I was in that offense with the two tight ends catching passes, holy cow, that would be amazing. But so you're still kind of watching the games, and you're tweeting about it and things like that, but you're not in broadcasting, as you mentioned. So what is life like today for Joel Dreessen as far as acclimating himself away from the NFL? 5 years out now, 6 years out. I see you're, like we mentioned, your son's here in the room as we tape this. So you're a dad and you're dedicating a lot of your time to that. What's life like today for you from a dad perspective, a husband perspective, a spiritual perspective?
Man, I feel so very blessed. Obviously, it's a daily battle dealing with some of the head stuff and the pain stuff and that sort of thing. But my wife and I, we live on 35 acres in Castle Rock, and we have another cattle ranch just east of Amarillo. So managing those two places takes up a lot of my time. I go to a lot of physical therapy to keep the body feeling good. So I have a workout partner in Bo Scaife. He's a former NFL tight end too. So we work out together Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so it's good to have that locker room feel. It's great to have a friend. He's been a really good friend to me. A lot of dad time. I have a 9-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, and I just feel really blessed. I do a little carpentry work, taking on small projects around our ranches, and when the hands and everything feels good enough to do that sort of thing. So I stay busy. Sometimes it's hard not having a structured day, but it really, my schedule depends on how my body feels that particular day, honestly.
Interesting. As we close, last question here. We ask this to all of our guests here on Sports Spectrum. I'm really fascinated to hear what your answer will be. What is God teaching you today? What are you learning from the Lord? He's brought you where you are right now. We mentioned all that you've gone through in your journey. So what is God teaching you? He teaches us something new, it feels like, every day. And it talks about renewing the mind daily in the Bible and the Word. But what is the Lord teaching you right now, Joel Dreessen?
I think to keep fighting, to keep finding that next level of faith, to be the spiritual leader of my family. There was never a great model of that for me, so I'm kind of fabricating my own, so to speak, and trying to make it important to my kids and to my wife and to my family as a whole. But I also realized that you're going to face incredible temptation still throughout your life. And the only way to get through it is to pray your way out of it. And I would say, what is God teaching me right now? Probably to keep fighting, keep finding another level to your faith. And, to me with football, it was always so easy to do that. There was always the next thing to achieve. And I was going to need my faith to do that. But now that I can't play football anymore, what is that next level? What does that look like for me? And to me, it's not, it's not chasing more money. It's not pursuing that. To me, it's time. The most precious gift you can give to anyone is the gift of your time. So I really try to allocate that to the people that mean the most to me. And that's being around for my children and my wife and my parents and my family and those in my inner circle.
He is Joel Dreessen, and this has been a great conversation, brother. I appreciate you. Appreciate your transparency, and really just glad that you were able to connect and do this interview. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you having me on.
That was really good stuff there from Joel Dreessen, longtime NFL tight end, and very transparent stuff, too. The NFL, man, that's real stuff right there when you talk about all the injuries and a guy who was never the best player on his team and played 8 seasons and grinded through just to make it, wasn't expected to make it, and 6th rounder out of the league for a season in 2006, and then gets to play 8 years in the NFL. And you could sense how grateful Joe was. You could sense how real his faith is and how much he is wrestling through even today to that and fighting through it, as he talked about when I asked him that last question about what he's learning from God. And man, that NFL life, when you adjust to post-NFL life, some guys have a difficult time with that. And Joel was very open about his mental struggles with acclimating himself to real life and depression and even suicidal thoughts. And gratefully, Joel persevered through. He got help with counselors, and he's pushing through. And so we wish Joel nothing but the best, and really am grateful to have him here on Sports Spectrum today. And you can follow him along on Twitter. It's just at Joel Dreessen. You can see him there. And Joel's got a lot of fun things to share on social media, certainly about football and about his beloved Colorado State Rams football team. And he's a good dude. So give him a follow. Let him know you heard his story and his journey here on Sports Spectrum. We appreciate Joel. We also want to, again, direct you to our brand new podcast, our second podcast from the makers of Sports Spectrum. It's called Football Sunday, and it is out now. Go subscribe everywhere podcasts are found. First-person stories from current and former NFL players on God working profoundly in their lives. Guys like Drew Brees and Kirk Cousins, Benjamin Watson, huge names, guys who are in the league or recently retired. Guys like Matt Hasselbeck and Brandon Marshall and Thomas Davis. You're going to love hearing their stories, first-person stories told by the athlete themselves on how God has worked in their lives. Subscribe today, Football Sunday Podcast. It's a great, great podcast. I promise you, you'll love it. Subscribe today. Thanks so much for listening to this episode with Joel Dreessen here at Sports Spectrum. I want to direct you to our website, sportspectrum.com. That's where all of our content can be found. Also, check out our social media pages and hit us up there. Like, retweet, post, share, all of those things that you can do in social media land. Definitely tag us. Let us know that you heard this podcast or any other stories, whatever it is, from the world of Sports Spectrum. We are truly grateful that you invest your time, your energy, and that you care about what we're doing, because all we want to do is be a vessel, be an outlet to point people back to Jesus. Thanks for listening. We love you guys. We'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum's podcast.